Hi there. I'm going to start with a game you've probably heard of, Fortnite. It's the biggest game of the moment. Many of you have probably played it. Many of you will know other people who've played it or watched it. And if you do, you'll know that it's a pretty compelling experience. So compelling, in fact, that luminaries such as Prince Harry have suggested that it be banned. So Fortnite has about 250 million players a month. So if Fortnite were a country, it would be the fourth biggest country in the world. Processes 92 million events per minute. And the data it accumulates grows at 2 petabytes a month. Peak web traffic at the launch of the 5th season was 37 terabits per second. And to give a sense of scale, the peak traffic for content associated with the US presidential election in 2016 was roughly a fifth of that level. They held a concert in Fortnite not too long ago by the DJ Marshmello. 10.7 million people came to that concert in real time. So that they were able to create a live event, which almost 11 million people attended, and then tens of millions of people streamed it afterwards. And last month, they held the Fortnite World Cup, and a teenager called Bugger won the competition and trousered $3 million, which is 50% more than Tiger Woods took home from the Masters. So the point is, it's big. And you need serious horsepower to run it. And that's why they're all in on AWS. I'm going to read this quote from Chris Dill, the director of platform at Epic Games, the developer of Fortnite. We decided to go all in using AWS because they enable us to offer a quality gaming experience to millions of gamers around the world simultaneously. And they're not alone. So more than 90% of the world's biggest public games companies use AWS, including notable names such as Electronic Arts, Ubisoft, Activision, and others that you would recognize. And from the rest of this session, I'm going to explore why they use AWS and what learnings that might have for the gaming industry. Before I go further, I should just explain a little bit more about me. I've been at AWS for just over a couple of years. I arrived via an acquisition. I was the co-founder and CEO of a company that Amazon bought called GameSparks, which provided cloud services focused on the games industry. And we'll talk a little bit more about that service later. And I'm now part of Amazon Game Tech. So I run business development for Amazon Game Tech in EMEA. In terms of what that is, I mean, it's multiple things. It's a public brand. It's a virtual team and the way we organize ourselves internally. But the cool thing for you guys to understand is that our role is to contextualize Amazon and AWS for the games industry. So we explain to the games industry why Amazon and AWS is relevant to them and what they can use us for. So I'm going to give a 10,000-foot view of what Amazon AWS does, and then I'm going to zero in the use cases where I think the learnings for gaming might be. You might ask, what does Amazon AWS do for games? And the answer is a lot. So I'm going to move through this quite quickly before drilling deeper. To start with, we offer global infrastructure and services. So this is the core of what AWS offers. It's infrastructure in the cloud, and we'll talk more about that in a moment. Now, you can build almost anything you like with AWS services, but we see common patterns, common use cases, common things that our customers are building. And when we see customer need, we often react to it by building managed services that are specifically focused on a particular challenge that our customers have. And we offer a number of these. So one of them I've already mentioned, GameSparks. GameLift is another. GameOn is another. Some of them are in the AWS portfolio, some are not. But the point is that they anticipate what our customers and games want to do with AWS and pre-build the service for them. Then we have content creation tools. To keep this simple, this is mainly a game engine called Lumberyard. It's a AAA game engine called Lumberyard. Sort of competes with or is similar in scope to the likes of Unity or the Unreal Engine, which you may have heard. And that's available free to developers if they're using AWS. And then obviously we bring distribution and marketing to the party. So Amazon.com, obviously, you'll all know. Most of you will be customers. One of the biggest retailers of entertainment products in the world. But we also have App Store, which is the App Store for the Kindle and Fire devices, which are relevant both to mobile devices and to televisions. And then we have Twitch. And for those who aren't familiar with Twitch, it's essentially YouTube for gamers. It's a place where people go to watch other people play games, and they do so in huge numbers. But having gone through the 10,000-foot view, I'm now going to identify the key use cases where the learnings might reside. So most of AWS usage by the games industry is focused on these three workloads. So one of them is game servers, one of them is analytics and machine learning, and one of them is backend services. So I'm going to dig into each and look for those learnings. Firstly, game servers. This is a quote from Supercell. So you'll know Supercell. They were sold to Tencent for $10 billion 2 or 3 years ago. You'll know them for games like Clash of Clans, Clash Royale. They run their estate. They're all in on AWS as well. They run their estate on AWS. And the world of gaming never sleeps. We owe every player a great experience, and AWS is our solution to make that happen. Now, game service is an interesting one. It's a great showcase for the core benefits of using AWS. So if you are Fortnite or Supercell, and you're running your game servers in the cloud, one of the key benefits you get is cost. So you replace a huge CapEx investment with a variable cost linked to your actual usage, and you benefit from the huge economies of scale that Amazon offers. You also benefit from elasticity. So the amount you use can scale up and scale down within minutes. You don't need to try and forecast how much you need to use. And this is really relevant to games which have wildly fluctuating usage. It means you don't have to guess, and you don't have to make capital investments focused on your peak loads. Also, global scale. So Fortnite runs its game servers on AWS and has players all over the world, and AWS allows them to offer all those players a great experience. But there are another couple of benefits as well, which are relevant, particularly early on in the process. So when Fortnite was first experimenting with making Fortnite, the fact that they were using cloud allowed them to spin up resources very quickly and increase the pace of their innovation. They didn't need to wait for a physical piece of hardware to be installed. They can just spin it up within minutes and then spin it down when they didn't need it anymore. And that really speeds through that sort of learning phase and innovation phase at the beginning. And those benefits to innovation persist, because the great thing is you don't need to focus your scarce IT resource on building and maintaining infrastructure. You can focus this all on doing the core thing which makes a difference for you, which in the case of Supercell and Fortnite is making and running great games. So those benefits are relevant to gaming just as they're relevant to almost all industries. It'll help you guys run your IT real estate efficiently. But I don't think that that's where the core learnings from games are going to reside. If I move on to analytics, we're getting a little closer here. So I'll read the quote. So this again from Supercell. We collect data because our games don't stay in the top 10 lists automatically. Success has to be earned by listening and responding. Now, this should feel pretty familiar to you guys. So the gaming industry does exactly the same thing. So games has a number of expert practitioners of analytics, but so too does gaming. So the learnings really are associated with peers sharing and swapping best practice. And where they would probably learn most from each other is not what to do, but how to do it. And in that context, I'll give you sort of a flavor of what AWS offers in this space. And then I'm going to drill down into the back-end services where I think we'll find the most interesting learnings. So on the analytics side, AWS has a broad range of services to help customers build analytics and data pipelines, which are critical. If you're going to understand what's going on in your business, you need to build one. And if you use AWS or public cloud, you can do that quickly, cheaply, and you can run it on global scale. We made reference to Fortnite and their 92 million events per minute. We have 11 or so specific analytics services, and these integrate with and overlay a much broader range of compute and database and storage services. And just to chuck a few examples, at one end of the scale, we have lake formation, which allows you to build a secure data lake in days. And then we have Kinesis, which allows you to process and analyze real-time data streams. And then we have Amazon Redshift, which is a data warehouse, Amazon EMR, which is a managed Hadoop service, Amazon Athena, which allows you to do in-situ analysis of data that you've stored in S3, and AWS QuickSight, which allows you to visualize your data. All useful stuff. So too is what we do in machine learning. So machine learning is growing really quickly at AWS. And more machine learning happens on AWS than anywhere else. So we have tens of thousands of customers. Last year, they grew by 250%. We have twice as many public references as any other provider. And those references are quite fun. I mean, it's such a long list, but you can pick out some sort of choice examples. So the NFL heavily use AWS, so does Formula One, so does ZipRecruiter, so does Tinder. An example closer to home is Sony. Sony PlayStation use machine learning to optimize their shop fronts. And there are basically three areas. So the core of it is SageMaker, which is a managed service, and it allows data scientists and developers to build, train, and deploy machine learning models. But there's a layer below it and a level above it. So the level below is machine learning frameworks and infrastructure. So if you want to build it yourself rather than use SageMaker, you have to be quite an expert practitioner to do that. But if you want to do that, AWS is a great place to do it. I think 85% of TensorFlow workloads in the world run on AWS. And then there's a level above it. So there are a number of managed services focused on specific use cases. So for example, if you want to offer recommendations, there's a service called Personalized that will help you do that. If you want to have your computer recognize what it's looking at, we've got a service called Recognition that will help you do that, which incidentally has some applications in the gambling space. So in the UK, one of the big high street bookies is using Recognition to recognize problem gamblers, self-declared problem gamblers when they walk into physical betting shops. There's also speech, meaning the computer can say what it reads, or it can write down what it hears, and language, so translation services. All of them really interesting. But here's where we get to the meat of it. It's the back-end services where the learnings are greatest. So back-end service is a bit of a catch-all phrase. So there's three broad areas. So firstly, there's player profile, which is basically introducing the idea of a player identity and history. And that allows you to start learning and responding and personalizing and talking specifically to that player. So a lot of those backends are focused on that player profile. A lot of it is focused on game updates. So if you want to keep your game fresh and interesting to your players, you want to sort of add new content elements to it. And those backends do that. So they deliver game updates, game patches, new versions, new skins. And then there's game features. And now we're right in the center of where the learnings are. So there's three broad chunks of game features. Firstly, there's transaction systems, so allowing your players to buy things and trade things. If you're working in the free-to-play space, which is a very substantial segment of the game sector, this is fundamental to your business model. You make your money because a minority of players will buy in-game items, so your transaction system is core. But then there's also metagame and social. And this is really where the learnings are. So The metagame. In games, there's this sort of mental model of the core loop and the metagame. And I'm not familiar enough with gaming, it may be the same. But the core loop is what you do every time you go and have a session. That session could last a minute, 5 minutes, 15 minutes, an hour. But it's the thing that you go in and you do. It's the core of the game. The metagame is what brings you back to the game time and time again to repeat that core loop. So it gives that sense of persistence. And then there's social, and then these are social features which allow players to connect with each other. And they end up being really important for a few reasons. I mean, they can be simple, like leaderboards, how am I doing versus someone else, or they can be much more complex, like multiplayer gameplay or chat systems. I'm going to drill into them in a second. Oops, wrong button. Just a little bit of background. AWS always wants to give you choice about how you do things. So there's two broad flavors of game backends at AWS. You can either build your own, and many expert practitioners like to do that using services like API Gateway and Lambda and CloudFront, et cetera. Or you can use a managed service, which is basically a pre-built service because we can anticipate what people want to do. GameSparks, which is the company that I used to run, is our managed service for backends. And so drilling into GameSparks. Broadly, it allows customers to add gamification features. That's the way you should think about it, because I'm about to set the context for the next speaker. There are leaderboards, how am I doing versus other people. There are achievements. I get a sense of recognition for doing things and progressing in the game. There are rewards and loyalty. They make me feel valued. They make me feel like somebody's watching the time that I put into the game and rewarding me for it. And there are quests and challenges and tournaments which sort of give me the motivation of a target or competition with other players. Now the question is, why do games do this? Now, they are about engaging intrinsic motivators for players. So if you look at let's go to free-to-play mobile game, for example. There's no extrinsic benefit of playing that game. There's nobody standing behind you with a stick, hitting you on the head if you're not playing it. You can't win money by performing well within the game. So why do people play that game? Well, to an extent, it's just fun. It's distracting. But if you can engage intrinsic motivators, you're more likely to get a sense of ongoing play, higher retention, higher lifetime value. Because those intrinsic motivators, they really deepen engagement. Now, to give you a sort of explanation of what I mean, an intrinsic motivator would be a sense of purpose, or a sense of progress, I'm getting better, or a sense of mastery, I've reached my destination, I'm great. Or even a sense of autonomy. In a busy world, this is a quiet space where I feel in charge. Or a sense of connectedness. Like I'm playing a game, lots of other people are playing it, maybe I'm playing directly with them, maybe I'm just comparing my performance with leaderboards, but I feel part of something bigger. That's another intrinsic motivator in itself. And my hypothesis is that those intrinsic motivators could also be brought to bear in gaming products. Now, the best way to explore this is actually through a case study. So I'm really just the warm-up act. This gets more interesting if we make it real. And so our friends and partners at Scientific Games are going to provide that case study now about the application of gamification in a real money environment. So that brings the end to part one and my speech. I hope you're looking forward to part two. Thank you very much.